Thank you for joining me today for the Champaign-Urbana Jewish Federation Holocaust Education Center podcast series. I am joined today by Linda Bauer, the former executive director of the Champaign-Urbana Jewish Federation and the daughter of Holocaust survivors. Thank you for joining me today, Linda.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
As the former executive director of CUJF, how long have you been in Champaign-Urbana and what led you to that organization?
Well, I have been in Champaign-Urbana for 40 years. Prior to that, I lived in Colorado and my family raised me there. They came from Germany after the Holocaust. Then I came here to work for WILL radio and TV and other enterprises in the 40 years. As far as what led me to CUJF, that was interesting because I was sort of retired, was no longer in a regular type job. And actually, I was recruited. And a couple of people who were on the committee came to me and asked if I would be interested. I had had experience in leadership and, of course, in the Jewish community. So I thought that would be a good challenge, especially because Federation was hesitant to hire somebody from out of town who would have to move. I was right here and really was able to bring the organization up, bring it to life again.
How long have you been involved with the CUJF Holocaust Education Center, and how was this developed?
The Holocaust Education Center, it was there when I came, is several years old. It was probably one of the first kinds of programs CUJF had. And, I was involved a little bit as executive director, and now that I've retired, I was asked if I'd be interested in being on it again. I think certainly, because I have knowledge and experience and also the interest in letting people know what can happen.
We are going to get into that a little more. This portion of the podcast series is comprised of conversations with the families of Holocaust survivors. Both of your parents were Holocaust survivors, and you lost your grandmother at Auschwitz. How old were your parents when they met, and can you tell me that story?
Sure. What happened after they met is a lot happier than what happened before. My mother and her family were in Lodz, Polish. Both my parents are Poland. What they did in Lodz was put in a ghetto, so people kind of segregated from the general population. And then at one point, they took a lot of the men out, and who knows what happened to them. And then they took the women, and they took them to camps. And they said, "We are going to the country. It'll be beautiful there. You can work on crops and so on." And of course, my mother was a very smart woman, even at the age of about 16, 17, which she was after the liberation. And she's not trusting what she's hearing. And at one point, they stopped to let them out at a particular camp. And my mother saw down the ways away a truck bringing women up to it. And my mother, very intelligent, said, let's try to get on that one, because she was pretty sure the path from the one they had been riding was not going to a good place. And as you said, my mother's mother died in Auschwitz in the crematorium. We're not as clear on how my father's part of the family, his mother and his stepfather, what happened to them and how they may have died. I do see my grandmother's name in the Holocaust Museum information, and she did die at Auschwitz. But as far as the other ones, I'm not sure what happened to them.
At what point did your parents meet? You're welcome to go into the details if you are comfortable doing that, of what led up to them being liberated, but I thought you might want to focus more on how they met moving forward.
Yes, and I actually did a PowerPoint with pictures and so on, and the story becomes happier after that. There was a place called Theresienstadt. I believe it was in Czechoslovakia. The Germans were aware that Americans and Russians and the Allies were finishing up the war. Germans did not have much more time. So they were bringing the prisoners further away, and Theresienstadt was kind of the last place. And it was liberated by the Soviets. I understand. Well, what you had then was hundreds of young people, because people like my grandma, I would say anybody over 40 or even 35, didn't have the stamina to be able to survive. So what you had was a number of teenagers with no family, no home, nothing to do. Again, the Allies kind of helped figure this out. They established work camps, not like the Nazi work camps, but kind of vocational ed. So anyway, young people were looking for each other. My mother, probably 17 at the time, was also looking for her boyfriend that she had in Lodge. I've seen pictures of him. His name was Daniel, and my brother was named after him. She was asking, "Where's Daniel? Do you know Daniel?" And one gentleman said, "Daniel's dead. The Nazis shot him." And my mother said, "No, I don't believe you." And of course, that was a big shock for her. And so the man said, "Oh, there's here, down there. See, that's Wolf. He was a friend of Daniel's. You go talk to him." So my mother went to talk to Wolf and found out that Daniel had injured his foot and the Nazis shot him because he couldn't walk. Yeah, it's pretty sad. I've said it enough times that it's not believable.
Well, you said she was smart and she was strong. How did she pull herself up and grieve and move on from that?
The man that told her about Daniel, his name was Wolf Kleiman, and Elsa was very cute. She was a teenager and he was young. He was probably 3 years older than her. And I don't know all the details of what happened in the middle, but they started in a relationship and started to live together, got married, and had me. Now, before all that happened, they were in the work camps. My father learned dentistry. I still have a pair of model of his teeth. That's our family heirloom with nothing else left after the war. People were ready to resettle or figure out what they were going to do. So my father asked if Elsa, my mother, would come with him to where he had some opportunities. And she was, I don't know. So they left it at that. I have some letters that he wrote her. They're wonderful. No stamps. You gave it to somebody and said, "Look for Elsa in Terezin." And one couple was going there, but not coming back. But there was a woman and her son who were going to Terezin and coming back to where my dad was. She came because at that point, my dad had figured out the accommodations, the living arrangements, and so on for survivors was adequate, and she could live with him. And it took a long time to get the paperwork to come to the United States. So, for instance, my father had aunts and uncles in Canada, and they were really anxious to sponsor him. Single young man, good looking, but then he got married. They kind of lost interest. Okay. Then next, my mother applied. She had some relatives in Connecticut. Uncle, I think that was her mother's brother, and they applied. And that was going along pretty well. But as I said, my mom and dad had married, and in the middle of all the paperwork, I was born. So what do you have? New paperwork.
So flash forward, at what age did your parents tell you that they were survivors?
They didn't tell me. It was kind of baked in, part of them. And especially when we came to the United States and we settled in Pueblo, Colorado, because there was a steel mill there that my mother found out about from a friend of hers. That's just what we were. And we didn't tell anybody at that point. It wasn't made common knowledge by us anyway. It was too fresh, too painful.
Did your parents ever perceive themselves as victims, or were they stronger because of what they went through, or both?
To a small extent, they were victims. They lost their families, they lost their lives, day-to-day living, and so on. But they were survivors. So they looked ahead rather than look back. And getting married and having a child was a whole new beginning for them. And my dad particularly was very strong. My mother was strong too, but a little more fearful about blending into the new society and so on.
Are there tangible ways that you feel that you are the child of survivors, you and your siblings? Did you compare stories, and is there anything tangible that you felt as a result?
Well, I had two siblings younger than me, born in Colorado. We didn't talk about it very much, but I will say, being a Holocaust survivor's child, seeing the anti-Semitism that's coming in the US and in other parts, I mean, there's some PTSD there. It kind of makes you agitated, makes me agitated, makes me sort of fearful and like, oh no, not again. Even as a kid, I didn't talk about it too much. What do you say? Somebody says, oh, where's your grandpa? He's a bunch of ashes. No.
Scientists say survivors of genocide have proof of surviving trauma.
Yes.
I imagine you feel that based on everything you just said.
Yeah, I do. But on the other hand, it doesn't make me hide under a table. I get on with my life. My parents, especially my dad, got on with his life. And, my mother did pretty well. She was a little more shy and fearful. But I didn't say to kids, hey, all my grandparents were gassed. I mean, it's a very difficult spot for a child to be in.
Was that hard for your children to grasp as well when you told them?
I think they're a little further, each generation's just a little further. So it was hard, but they handled it pretty well. And by then, by the time I had my kids, people were more familiar with the Holocaust. They built the museums, people were speaking about it, and so on. There were no speeches or lectures or classes, at least the first 10, 20 years after we came to America.
Anti-Semitism, as you just mentioned, never went away, and now it feels like it's on the rise again, and it should terrify every single one of us, Jewish or not Jewish. Do you think the world could or would ever let what happened between 39 and 45 happen again?
Never thought it could happen. And we spend a lot of time in Holocaust education talking about what did happen. We do need to focus on what still could happen and how to prevent it. And, some of the wildest things happen. It could be. I mean, if you look at the history of the Jewish people, we have been persecuted for centuries. In fact, I have a friend that found out about my family history and the concentration camps and all this stuff. He said, what did you guys do? We didn't do anything. See, that's the thing. I cannot say with certainty it wouldn't happen again. I could say people are more aware of what these things can turn into. And hopefully we have more allies than we did during World War II that would come to our aid and help us fight that.
Have you ever personally had to confront a Holocaust denier? And if so, or if not, what would you say to them?
I don't believe I have, but, I can say, well, my parents were in the camps. They told me what happened. I believed them. And we knew other people. We knew other Holocaust survivors. Sometimes they would settle in the same towns because somebody would say, hey, just like my dad, here's a good place to work. And there's a Jewish synagogue here and so on. So, people kind of helped each other settle. I haven't really met somebody that said, it didn't happen. Because like I said, I didn't see it personally. I was too young, but I saw the after effect and what my parents had to say and their friends and the Jewish community as a whole. And to me, it is unusual that the Jews, particularly century after century, have had to confront this.
When you want to educate people, not just the youth, but there are plenty of people past high school who don't know the horrific details of the Holocaust, what keeps motivating you to be a part of the Holocaust Education Center and to keep imparting your wisdom on the future?
I think it is good for people to know what happened, and a lot of people don't. I'm forward thinking, and I do want to tell the story, but what I really want to do is say, here's how you can help this from happening again. If you feel at all that the Jews have been not treated fairly, then learn a little more and then stand up for your Jewish friend and stand up for understanding and stand against those who are coming with signs. And I don't think half of those people even know what they're talking about.
Is that what motivated you into a life of serving people that may be less fortunate than you? Do you think that it came from your childhood?
Partly, I didn't spend all my life in social service. I worked for a newspaper and public radio station and so on. But especially the newspaper, it had funds that it gave to people to help them. And I was on that committee. And so the organizations I've been involved with have reached out to help. And I think Jewish, not Jewish, people have to help one another. They have to be kind to one another. They have to try to understand each other instead of just saying, oh, you're different.
The Holocaust Education Center hosted the exhibition entitled The Auschwitz Experience in the Art of Prisoners. The exhibit presented the fate of the victims of Auschwitz through the works of those who survived. What do you hope visitors understood after leaving the exhibit that they may not have realized or known before they walked in?
It was a different look at what was happening, because really the main images we have of Jewish concentration camp members, group of them in the striped shirts and kind of looking pretty sad. But these artworks were of actual things happening in the camp, maybe secretly drawn, kind of depended. So it was kind of difficult because some of them showed people they're going to get killed. Some people didn't have anything to eat. That's documented. The lodging was certainly not comfortable. So it really showed what went on inside the camps and not the multiple people kind of thing. It would take one person and show what a terrible place he was staying in and how he had no food. And he didn't really have furniture or anything. But this was the life in a camp.
In general, what are some of the questions you get when you tell people you're the child of survivors? What are some of the common things people ask you?
That hasn't happened a lot recently. That's kind of interesting. We're getting more and more away from it. But they might ask, how did it happen? How did, your parents meet? That kind of thing. And where were you born? And I don't get a lot. I think that's why I'm all for Holocaust education, 100%. But I don't want to leave it all in the past, because in 20 years, we'll be talking about something that happened, 60 and then 80 and so on. We need to make it relevant to today and say, this is still happening. I mean, even though you don't always see people carrying signs and flares and all that, there are people who hate Jews and want to do something about it. And I think in this day and age, people are less tolerant and more divided. And so now there's more of an opportunity for people to rebel without going to jail.
This is more of a spiritual question before I let you go, but do you think your grandmother and your ancestors are looking down? Do you feel their presence when you look in the faces of your children and your grandchildren?
Yeah. Some of them survived, not very long, but yes, they were strong. They gave that strength to my parents. And of course, I had it. And yes, my kids, I have 2 daughters, have strong Jewish hearts. And one of them even became Orthodox. And it has really formed her life, given her even more purpose. Judaism is not just a religion, it's a culture, and it's people that hold together and worship God in several ways. I mean, it's not all one thing. Not everybody's Orthodox, not everybody's Reformed, but we all worship the one God, and we try to live the life that God wants us to, which is to be honest and fair and loving and take care of one another.
Linda Bauer, former executive director of the Champaign-Urbana Jewish Federation, while continuing your work with the CUJF Holocaust Education Center, we are lucky to have you in this community. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Elizabeth.